Adam Sedia. So for those folks that are watching this here, my shtick. I end up talking to my guest for a few minutes beforehand, and I always have to cut it off because we really just start talking, and I find that I waste more good content before the podcast than actually during the podcast. So I didn't mean to be rude by saying shush. Let's wait, but that's how that goes. My guest on this episode today is Adam Sedia. I had met Adam, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago. Don't hold me to those numbers. Adam for me, Adam wears several different hats. One of which is I met him through his some political work, some attorney work that he does, and through that, which is why I wanted to bring him on here, is Adam is an attorney, a poet, a composer, husband, father. I adore your wife and your kids,
Oh, thank
and
you.
so you really have what I think society, I mean, maybe now isn't completely interested in, but an extremely well-rounded life. A productive member of society, raising the next generation of productive members of society, your own interests that you explore, and you're contributing to society. So thank you for taking an hour or so out of your day to
Well, that's one of the best compliments anyone's paid me. Thank you.
Oh, not a problem, not a problem. The podcast is still short, so who knows? Maybe I'll insult you later. No, I I wouldn't do
Wouldn't
that.
be the first. And I
Would-
did correct you. We did go to high school together, and I believe we played in the symphonic band together for two years. I
so
think.
I played the saxophone. It's fine, but and you bring up an interesting point. So I always say there are three types of folks from high school that. So we're at the time that you and I graduated, it was at the Star Plaza, which is now a defunct building, a demoed, razed. There were three types of people that would walk across the stage. There was, I don't know, 800 of us, 700, whatever, hundreds and
Something.
hundreds of us. There are three type of people. Ones that I knew them and I knew them to be in my grade. I knew them, but I didn't realize they were in my grade. And then folks that I had no clue who they were. I didn't become any type of maybe social butterfly might be a goofy word to say, but I extremely introverted in high school. Um, I, and I think symphonic band might have been as exciting as I got in high school. I wasn't a part of any clubs, didn't do any sports, kept to myself. Junior, senior year, I worked a lot. Part-time, high school jobs, movie theater, at the Star Plaza, actually, where we graduated, stuff like that. Um, so yeah, to hear that, who's another person? Pete Seat.
Yes, yes.
Pete
He's
Seat is one, and for the life of me, I always had folks say, as I got into politics, oh, Pete Seat, he does all these politics. I was like, then I felt bad because I felt like I didn't meet him until later on. And then similar story, he's like, well, we saw each other here. And I was like, I have a rolling memory. So for each year that I gain in life, like 3 on the back end drop off. so I don't want to be held responsible for that stuff. What did you play in symphonic band? If you say
trumpet.
saxophone and we sat next to each other, I'd be
No,
really
a trumpet.
embarrassed.
I was behind you, so I
Okay.
would forgive you if you didn't know I was there.
Well, there we go. I had a good friend of mine, um, Amanda Bailey. She played the tenor saxophone.
Redhead, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
remember.
Um, yeah, we still friends. I oddly enough, she stood up in my wedding, and I stood up in her wedding. Um, and it. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, I loved band. At the time, I loved it because it was an easy A, and admittedly, I was not the best student, which I'm really interested to get into some of your background here because I get the sense that you're either a really good student or you're really good at learning and grasping the things that you're interested in.
Well, it started out the first one and it
Okay.
ended up the second one. In high school, I was very much an overachiever. In fact, I was the kind of student who I really didn't. I wish I had taken. I didn't like being in band because you didn't get the extra weighted GPA point for having an honors class.
Right.
And if I could go back, I probably would have taken art and a whole bunch of other classes, and that maybe would have led me in a different direction. But as it was, I loaded up on the AP classes and took all the tests. And then I had gotten into the college I wanted to, the University of Chicago. And then in my senior year, I just kind of had a, hey, let's step back. Let's maybe, life might be about fun too. So I went to where I had a scholarship for, IU down in Bloomington, which, I actually visited campus and I was like, this looks like a place I would want to spend 4 years. And, it lacked the prestige and all that, but, I spent college, again, I was kind of an overachiever. I double majored in chemistry and English just because I didn't know if I wanted to go into science or something liberal arts. So I figured I could do both. Why not? And at the same time, I also cultivated my hobbies there. I was in, if anyone watching went to IU, I was in Reed, which is where all the music students were, and it's right across from the concert hall. And there would be free symphony and very cheap opera concerts going on, and I would just go across the street and watch, and that's how I got interested. Well, I was interested in classical music going back, even as a child, which didn't make me very. It made me a weird kid because my father played in an orchestra and came out to Indiana from New York to study music originally at IU. So I had, the records we had growing up was a weird combination of big band, jazz, and, classical music, Strauss, Wagner, a lot of stuff. He was a trumpeter too, so it was a lot of stuff with brass. So when I went to IU, it was like I was in heaven there, with all this free live good music being played. And it was through that I got interested in composition, though I never went ahead and studied it. I taught myself. Same thing through. It was actually through music that I got my interest in poetry because the texts that a lot of the singing would be they didn't. It's not wasn't like the Beatles or I won't say they were really the first band to write their own lyrics. That wasn't done really before them. So what a composer would do is take a text by a poet and set it to music, and reading the text as I listened got me interested in that, and it got me attuned to the rhyme and the rhythm of poetry. So I tried my hand at that as well. And then when it came time to graduate, I wasn't sure, science or liberal arts. So I the option of patent law was brought up, and I thought, well, that would be a way to use both my majors, and that was behind my decision to go up to DePaul in Chicago, that and a scholarship.
The scholarship that yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, it wasn't it wasn't a freebie, but it helped. And then I graduated in 2009, which was the absolute worst time to enter the job market,
I was going to
especially
say
as
at that point, everything, especially on a for professionals, everything was imploding at that point.
Oh yeah, in fact, my for listeners who don't know, my dad he was an attorney. He's a judge now. I asked him if he knew people to call, and in fact, he said everyone he called said that they would be happy to interview me, but their firm is actually laying off lawyers now. So not only was I entering a market where there weren't openings, I was competing with, lawyers with years of experience who were looking in the market too.
Well, and
So
that's tough too, because like any specialized field, I almost expect the conversation to say, "Hey, can you help me out here?" And the response would be, "Yeah, I'll help you out, but I'm also trying to help out 20 other guys that I know that that's hard."
oh yeah, 20 guys who have, experience and knowledge in the field. Even patent attorneys were losing their jobs. It was terrible. And so I made the decision. I came back home. Literally, I moved back in, studied for the bar, took the bar, and got picked up by a local firm in Dyer, the Rubino Ruman firm, and it was mostly personal injury was their big emphasis, but they did everything. So my first 4 years, I did injury, I did business litigation, I did family law, I did estates, I did wills and trusts. I did basically everything except work comp and Social Security, which in retrospect I'm glad I did because I did criminal work, I did criminal defense work, and that gave me a broad base of knowledge that I think very few lawyers have nowadays, especially when you go into the city. It's a very specialized area of practice. And when you go into an area like that, it's you learn a little bit of everything and you see how it fits together. No one, I always say, I didn't really want to talk too much about law, but no one's really just an injury attorney because guess what? Then you're litigating insurance coverage. Your client dies, you have to open an estate. Or your client's a minor and you have to know how to open a guardianship for them. So all of this fits in together in a very complex web. And I was lucky to get a taste of everything. And you figure out what you like and what you don't like along the way too.
What was there a point in this 4 years where okay, you graduated, you passed the bar, and now you're in the thick of all this. What was there at some point when it sounds like previously you were in the patent lawyer track, and now you're. Did it ever feel like you were jack of all trades, master of none? And did that ever give you pause? Like, am I just going to have to know everything now, or in your mind was it still a stepping stone to other things?
Interesting question. No, I wasn't frustrated by it. In fact, just because of I have a wide range of interests and hobbies, it sort of fit my personality. Because you get frustrated with one of your cases, you can spend a little time doing something completely different, and being good in one area can make you better in another area because
Mm-hmm.
I would get a lot of referrals. One of the things I did early on and that I'm still kind of locally known for is appellate work, taking up appeals. A lot of attorneys don't like to do that because the rules are fairly complex and unforgiving, and it's a lot of writing, which, most attorneys would rather go into court and, you know, talk to the judge or jury, get their check at the end of the day. For it's surprising for a profession that's so reading and writing intensive. It's not a lot of attorneys I find really like or are good
Like to
at
read and write?
or are very, I hate to say this, I don't want to sound like I'm insulting everybody, but are
No,
not
no.
really that good at it either. Um,
Well, I've often said in my experience just in politics. There's for every politician, there's 10 lawyers behind them doing stuff. And there's a few that I work with closely, and I've often said I kind of put them into tiers, like where would I need them? And so I've got a guy who, if I needed traffic court or small claims, I go to the. But I have always said, I may have even said it to you at some point, maybe not. But whenever it comes to this discussion I have with people, I said, if I ever had to go before the Supreme Court, I would want Adam, because I don't think anybody that I've met in my years and years of doing this is as thorough. And now it's not like I'm blowing smoke, but it is thorough. And I thought, if I needed someone at that level, that's Adam. And I've, having said that to other attorneys, they agree. It's, oh yeah, yeah, you don't want Adam in traffic court, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean,
No, I get what you mean.
if you're going to have a resource, use them where you where you need them. And I've always said, Adam, he's my Supreme Court guy. If I ever find myself there, and I think that just speaks to where you say, the appellate work is very thick and difficult. I thought, well, there's nobody that I would trust more to read through that. And I think that also ties back to my question about how were you as a student, because it seems to me like that's something that you enjoy, and so you would dive deep into that. And perhaps there was another topic that, I don't really care about that, so maybe I got a B or a C there. Now you're an overachiever, so you probably got an A, but mentally it was a B or a C because you really focused on something else.
Well, yeah, I mean, and law school is, I mean, I would completely change. This is a whole its own podcast. I would completely change the way law school's done. I would say it's antiquated, but I don't know if it even made sense back, 100 years ago. Um, it's all lecture. You get one final with the blue books, and it's not great. It's graded on a forced curve, they call it, where you're only allowed to give this many A's, this many B's, this many C's. So if everyone does great, you have to differentiate between the greatness and only pick a certain amount of A's. There's no objective scale. So I mean, it doesn't
In a
gauge.
room full of attorneys couldn't argue that. I mean, that just sounds like
Oh yeah, and it doesn't gauge knowledge. It gauges, I guess, ruthlessness, which I guess is one way to weed out
yeah.
successful lawyers. But I've heard horror stories, in the days before internet research. For the research and writing assignments, students would go in, read the book, and then tear out the pages so that no one else could find them. That's a
Yeah.
true story, by the way. Not one I've experienced, but or they'll misplace the book on purpose so that you can't find it. I mean, all
Hmm.
sorts of underhanded stories like that from law school.
You heard it here first, folks. Some attorneys can be underhanded,
Believe it or not.
believe it or not. Um, I have a question that may either tie into the underhandedness or tie into the fact that we just know some attorneys probably, if they can pawn off reading and writing, they're happy to do that. Um, and again, I want to let folks know that I know Adam through his his work as an attorney, and this podcast wasn't that, but it's so interesting. What is a common misbelief about your line of work, about being an attorney, that you'd like to debunk? In my mind, to be honest, when I hear attorney, my first thing is I just go to Shakespeare, kill all the lawyers. But it's just because it's something funny in my head. What is a common misbelief that, I mean, you've been doing this for years. You said it was 2008, 2009 you were done. So you've been doing this for, coming up on 2 decades here shortly. You've got to hear things that make you just bang your head against the wall and say, "No, it's not like that."
Well, I can't watch a lawyer show. I've
No.
not seen an episode of Law and Order in probably 15 years, and I've had no desire to watch it. Or someone commented me offhand on The Good Wife. They said, "Oh, I love how these attorneys, go to court at like get to work and go to court at like 11 a.m. for the first call. It doesn't work that way. I guess a lot of the conceptions aren't really off the mark. The first conception I'll make is your school is not really related, generally is not related to how competent you are. I've had a few time to work with and against attorneys who've gone to Harvard and Yale and all the big name schools, and I've walked away in every instance unimpressed. And they're not stupid, but
But I would imagine that
you
if they're wearing the cape of Harvard, you might expect something, and um, you know,
oh yeah, I mean, and they're at firms, they're getting compensated very well for it usually, but it's a branding, and and I'm not even getting into with the decline in the law school curriculum and its devolution into glorified social justice activism. But even from back in the day, it's more of a branding than I think anything substantive. And conversely, some of the best attorneys I've worked with and against have been graduates of the now defunct Valparaiso School of Law. So it's and people have their reasons for going to the school they do. It's not necessarily. I got into quote unquote better schools and higher ranked, but a bunch of factors went into my decision, and it's that case with every lawyer. So it's a fallacy to say, oh, to have the only reason for picking your lawyer as being, oh, this guy's an Ivy League graduate. And I think that leads into my second point, which would be that judges are smart. Again, there are a lot of good ones, a lot of diligent ones, but you have to remember they're picked for political reasons, not for because they're legal scholars. The legal scholars you'll find as professors, but the people on the bench are picked for political reasons. Either they're connected or there's some ideological reason behind it. So, and you learn that quickly. And I would say that even applies to federal judges. And you learn. I'll never forget. I always tell this story. The Indiana bar has these meet the judges for young lawyers, and I was starstruck. The names I had read in these decisions, I met them, and your first reaction is, oh, you're on the Court of Appeals. And then after you know them for a while, you're thinking, you're on the Court of
yeah,
Appeals?
same verbiage, just a different. Oh,
Exactly.
your okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So that's again something the public should keep in mind if they're on a jury or going into court. The person up there in the robe is not always the smartest person in the room.
I you know, I was always curious. You mentioned being starstruck at some of these folks. Um, you've also been around politics for a while. I've done that too, and it is amazing. The longer you spend in the orbit of some of these folks, the less not only the less impressed you are. And again, I'm not speaking to whether they're intelligent, right? But the less impressed you are, the less starstruck you are, but then the more concerned you are is like, oh, so this is how things are decided. Oh, okay then. And I've never had my faith in government and policy rattled as much as when I became involved and saw how the sausage was made, if you want to say that. And it's like, oh, okay, there's a lot more arbitrary to it than I think anybody realizes.
Oh yeah, well my my initiation into really getting involved in politics was serving as a deputy election commissioner in Lake County.
Yeah, done that a few times.
And the circuit they had me going was in Gary mostly. And you just see how the voting is run and the um, mentality of the people going out and voting or just being herded along by people, and you're thinking,
Yeah.
I don't think this is what the founders wanted.
No, and I've been a deputy election commissioner several times, and have been all over at Lake County. And Lake County is um, a really good snippet, I think, for a lot of the or a lot of the country,
Oh yeah, I
because
tell people it is one of the few places I can think of where you can go from heavy industry and ghetto to rural farmland in half an hour.
yeah, yeah, and see everything in between, every type of, I mean, every nationality,
Yeah.
every culture, um, every shade of melanin you could possibly imagine. We truly have everything here. And like you said, 30, 45 minutes, you can go from, one end of the spectrum to the other. And so, having been a deputy election commissioner to watch those, you're right. I've seen some of those places where they like cattle call and herd some of these folks to go in and vote. Um, I remember in 2008, I think there was a precinct in Gary that had 100% turnout, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's not possible." I was like, "Have you seen how they turn out the vote? They literally collect people and bring them in. Of course, it's possible to get that high a vote." And then I go down, down south, south of 231, and just like you said, a farmer will come in an hour later. Somebody on their lunch break will come in, and but we do have a little bit of everything here. So if that was your first thrown into the deep end of politics, that had to be eye opening.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I
Yeah, and then just the whole and then I helped count absentee ballots that day too, and that's a whole other discussion. Just how that it's a messy process. I'll just say that.
It is, and now I don't know when you did it, and so I can only speak to when I've witnessed it because I know they change some of these
Yeah,
sometimes. But
2012 and 20
okay,
12, 14, and 16. I did it.
okay, so I'm you've got two people there, one Republican, one Democrat. This person looks at it, that person looks at it. Do you agree? Fine. If you don't, then you set it aside, and they haggle that later. And now there's a huge movement on the conservative side of politics, and we're straying really here, but that's okay. That's what it's all about. To get back to paper ballots, and I don't like that idea at all. I really don't. I don't know where you stand on that, but my opinion is, I've got a friend who uses this argument a lot, and it is, have you seen? There's that heist movie where there are a bunch of magicians. I can't remember the name of it, but the idea was that all the money was locked in a vault, and there was 14 layers of security to get to the vault, and sure these one guys made it through, in the movie, but that's what machine balloting is. There's 14 layers of security before you get to the actual ballot. And so to just go to paper ballots removes all of those. And then you just slip them in there. And so I don't know. But that is a very
No
interesting
system is
process.
foolproof. There's a reason we switched over to from paper ballots to begin with. But I think there are at the same time legitimate concerns about how the way machine balloting is done in some locations.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a question of what safeguards you have in place. I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages to both, but it's kind of like a constitution. Justice Scalia, I think, remarked, if you read the Soviet Constitution, it's a model of fairness. Not only do they have freedom of speech, but a guaranteed protection of the right to go out and protest. But it was all meaningless because it wasn't lived up to. Same thing with an election. You could have the most on paper foolproof measure, but if people don't respect it and they're willing to be underhanded and cheat, you know, it's not going to matter.
I I want to steer back to what I wanted to bring you here because this will end up being a 4 hour podcast on just random political thoughts. Um, when when I started this podcast with you, I talked about all the different hats that you wear: attorney, poet, composer, husband,
Mhm.
father, neighbor, friend, all the things that you're constantly doing. Out of all of those, I want to talk about being a poet and a composer because in my mind, and this is me, maybe you'll educate me on some of this, that requires a different portion of the brain to operate. Now, I could be wrong. You could say that there's an art to being an attorney, and I believe there's an art. If you ever watch someone who's a really good operator with a backhoe, there's more art to that than science. I've seen so I don't mean to play on those words. I just mean being a poet. And I watch some of I occasionally you will post on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
I've read some of your stuff and listened to it, and it's fascinating for my brain to think that that's also the guy that I ask about some Indiana State code or
Sure.
something. And so, um, is that your primary in life, or is that just like a beautiful escape for you?
Oh wow. It is a beautiful escape, and if I could ever support myself doing it, I would probably still practice law as a hobby, just to
So
kind of like
you'd be okay flipping those then?
yeah, kind of like people do in retirement. I don't know if I'd ever want to hang it up entirely, but there is more. You talked about art in science, like operating a backhoe or drafting a contract. It also works in reverse. There's a lot of science in art. Writing a poem, and oh, again, I could go off on a rant. A lot of in vogue, we'll call it contemporary poetry, is just laziness. Now there's some good free verse out there and some classic free verse. Don't get me wrong, but it's I don't think a poet should go into free verse until they've mastered writing and rhyme and meter. Because you read some of this garbage, people just throw it out. You still have to follow rules of grammar, and grammar exists so that what you say makes sense. Um, and then when you write in form, you have to be you're limited. It constrains you into a meter and a rhyme, and you have to write it so that it sounds natural and not forced. And that's a huge challenge. And I could say the same thing even about prose writing, like fiction. Yeah, you can write down, you don't have those constraints, but you have to keep in mind plot and characterization, and it has to sound not just believable, but it has to be interesting. Same thing for music. You have rules of harmony that if you don't know how chord progressions work, it's going to sound like crap. And then at the same time, you have to follow the rules of chord progression and make it sound musical, make it have a melody, make it beautiful, and that can be a real challenge sometimes. And even when you get into atonal 20th century stuff with that, which I don't particularly like, but it's even more rigorous in its rules and in restrictions. So yeah, art is a way to express yourself, but if it's going to be good and enjoyable, there's also rules to follow. And in fact, if you produce a poem or a piece of music and it sounds good, after, and it's a tremendous effort to produce something that sounds and looks good. And if at the end of the day, once it's finished, rather, at that sense, you get that sense of achievement at having created or built something that you think is good.
Do and again, these may sound like ignorant questions because you don't know what you don't know. As you are, I don't know how your mind works like this. Do you have 20 different poems going on in your head that you're working on, 20 different pieces of music that are going on in your head at any given time, and occasionally when you're inspired by something, you just pick that file back up to work on it, or do you just lock in on one until it's done?
Mostly the former. I've had times where I can write a poem in one sitting, but what I always do when I do that is I put it away, I pull it up maybe a month later, and then I have one of two reactions. Either, oh, I wrote that, or I wrote that. Back to our
I need
tone
to do
again.
that with work emails.
Yeah. It's a good idea in general. It's a good
Sometimes
idea in
just
general.
write it, put it away, and then come back to it. And
I read that in ancient Persia, they wouldn't make a decision until they've decided it both drunk and sober. It's kind of the same thing. You want to step back and look at it. But most of the time, no. I mean, I'll get an inspiration right away. Like, oh, just the other day I had one where I thought, oh, that would make a great topic for a poem. You're writing, you see something, or you think of something, or something happens, and you're like, oh, I'll write about that. But then you have to sit down and actually put the pen to paper and make it sound good, make a piece of art out of it, and that takes time. So I always start when I have the inspiration, and then when I have time and the inclination, I go back and I add a little, change a little until I get something I'm satisfied with.
do you feel like that's a muscle that you exercise? When you said the other day you saw something, you thought something, and you had some inspiration to that, and that then it takes time. The amount of times that I'm in a spot where I have some type of creative vision in my head, I then have such a hard time going from whatever quantum image I have in my head to some type of analog pen and paper. I just have such a, because I have this vision in my head and I just don't know how to express that sometimes. Is that a muscle that you've worked through, or is that a block that you don't have, which is why you're adept at this?
No, it's a muscle that it takes training because I felt the same way when I started out at this when I was in my late teens, early 20s. It's especially with music because I'd have the exact sound I wanted, but then when you're haven't mastered the rules of harmony, it comes out kind of garbled and not exactly how you want it. It takes practice. Like anything, it takes practice, and the more you do it, the easier it is to go from inspiration to a finished work.
So if that's a muscle, a question that I had pre-written is going to tie into that. Turning point, all these things that you are. If you could just put a pause on life for a little while, which is impossible because, like I said, family man, husband, kids. Which one of those skills would you just put everything else on pause for to work at?
Right now, it would be music. I I have literally whole symphonies in my head that I just haven't had the time to sit down and put pen to paper on. Or I've partially completed things, and I would just you need, and that is, I think, a lot harder than poetry to or prose writing or any writing to write down, because language isn't the language we use is in some degree natural to us and we don't have to think about it. But when you write down in harmony, there's like an extra step of thought. And then when you're dealing with different instruments, you're dealing with colors of sounds, and it's a much more complex process. So yeah, if I had that option, I would sit down and knock out all the musical ideas I have, whirling around in me right now.
I think, hearing you, I wanted to massage my earlier comment of, everything that's in my head and how do you get that out? I think oftentimes for me, if I have a picture or a vision or something in my head that I want to get out, it is so tied with emotion that if I am able to put it out, it is now stripped of whatever it was making me feel at the time. And so then whatever I put down just feels kind of empty. And there will be times when I am drafting something for whatever, and Beck will watch me. And sometimes I get rude, but it's almost like it's not me. I'm just like, shh, shh, you can't interrupt the flow, because for me, once it's gone, and it evaporates into the wind. And the amount of good ideas that I've had that have escaped the window. But yes, it's that idea that for some reason, I'm not able to, and it's not a muscle that I tend to work that often. Is the emotion that I feel. So you've got these symphonies in your head, and if you were to focus on one, it probably makes you feel a certain way. I can almost translate what the music may be on the sheet of paper, but I tend to lose that grasp of the emotion that made it exciting and made me want to write it down in the first place.
Sure. Um, so I'll answer this two ways. The first one is when you have something in your head, you kind of live with it for a while, and the initial emotion goes away, but the memory of it doesn't. So you kind of you can approach it with the emotion, but from a more objective standpoint. The second one, and I've talked about this before, and this was actually brought up first time in the context of legal writing. And I can't, it's a female author, I can't remember her name, but she wrote about any writing and said that any writer wears four hats at different times: the madman, the architect, the carpenter, and the judge. And what the madman does is what you just described: is you get the inspiration, you just write it down. Write the first thing that comes in your head, write it down, get it on paper. You have the material you're working with. Then what the architect does is they create structure to it. Does it flow logically? Does it, how do we organize it? The carpenter is fine-tuning attention to things like grammar and style and diction. Is that the particular word I want to use at this point? And then the judge takes a overall glance at it. It's sort of the final step. Do I want to say it this way? What effect will it have? Does this mean what I want it to say? And you wear those hats at different times to when you produce any sort of writing, either creative or expository or what have you. And when I first read it, I thought, I was a little skeptical. But the more I do this, especially with the madman role, I think it makes sense. And that's how the writing process occurs. So you do have a little bit of the inspiration in the moment, but then shaping that and fine tuning it is a process, and it takes time and effort.
Um, we I want to shift to a few more things here. I want to be mindful of your time. We're into this about 45 minutes, and we could probably go for hours. But you are a reasoned and studied man. Um, uh, a question that I love asking folks is, what is the last big thing that you've changed your mind on recently? And that could be something that, hey, for the first 20, 30 years of my life I believe this. I hit my 40s and now I see this. But it's always an interesting challenge to say, okay, this is a belief that I've had for a while. Occasionally, let me challenge that. And sometimes things change. Can you think of something that was like, well, okay, I have now changed my views, or maybe even just tempered my views on something?
Oh, a lot. Most recent. Well, one's really controversial right now, and I'm not sure I want to get into that in a podcast. But
I
another one,
got you, no problem.
another one I'll say is actually it's been my estimation of the novelist Gore Vidal. I come from the political right, and I knew what he was, very much a leftist, and yeah, kind of a degenerate in the way he lived in so many ways. And I never, but then I actually he I was aware he was an important voice of post-war America, so I picked up a couple of his novels and read them. And he's, number one, a very good writer, and then number two is, you know, and I find this generally ever since the last four or so years, is I found that I have a lot more in common with those I used to call, left or on the left, than I thought I did. And that's been a larger change of frame of reference for me. Is it's not about what we try, capitalist, socialist, Democrat, Republican. I've been looking at things vertically when it's actually more horizontal. There's an elite vision, and then there's, I don't like using the word populist or popular,
Hmm.
but there's what has worked for thousands of years for most people in society, and what still works for us. Things that keep families together, keep them stable, keep people employed and not exploited. And I've seen things a little differently that way. And then there's a plan that people have that want to get into things like transhumanism, and you know you'll own nothing and be happy and all of that. And I don't think that's a political left-right divide. And I don't. It's not necessarily totally a class divide. It's a worldview divide, and that's kind of where I'm seeing things now.
And this is a show where I question my guess, and but occasionally I interject. One of the biggest things where I'm spending some of my time attempting to challenge my own beliefs is on faith and the construction of the modern Bible. And talk about a rabbit hole that you can go down. And so, if I were asked a question, I wouldn't have an answer yet. But because I'm exploring it, I'm trying to work it out. I'm trying to find something that fits in my head. That I say, okay, so maybe in a day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years, I'll have an interesting answer for that. But I do think it's very, and that's why I was excited to ask you that question, because I thought I never envisioned you to be a person to stay stagnant in your thought.
No, and I haven't.
That you would either do one of two things. You would either fortify what you believe with more reason and to strengthen that, or you would modify
Well, and I
something.
think anyone who has the luxury to sit back and think about things, and it's also about exposure to information. I'm a voracious reader, and the more I read, the more data points I have, and that what you said is exactly what happens. Either it confirms what you already believed, or you're kind of like science. You get your data points, and either yep, our theories are confirmed by the data, or we have to go back and figure out how to interpret this.
I have a I have a friend who had gone through a divorce, and I was talking with him, as he's moving on in life, and he said, the red flags that I had before are different now. He said there are some things that were red flag before that were non-negotiable that now it's like, well, that doesn't really matter. He said, but then there's other random things that just as the passage of time and his experiences, it's like now those are non-negotiables. And so again, you go through college, you go through IU Bloomington, then you go up to Chicago. You're doing all these things. You're going to form opinions, and it's a shame when, like you said, folks don't have or take the time to sit and challenge those occasionally. I do think that in the last, 5, 6, 7 years, Liam will be 10 this year, so certainly the last 10 years. I've made it a point. This is going to sound a little funny, and I don't know why in my head, but I have I have taken more time to sit and just think. Just think. And now you could say, oh, well, Bob, that's just because you're clearly on the spectrum and you're just disassociating from the world. Okay, call it what you want. I don't know. But there is something about reading something, watching something, getting a nugget of information, and just chewing on it for a while. And I wish, I think the world would be a better place if more people did that. And I, I also think it's a luxury because some folks just don't have the time. They're inundated with the world and they can't take a break. And I don't know if it's a matter of one makes the other happen. Is my worldview better now? Am I happier because I've made the time to think, or is it just I don't know?
Well, I think it certainly has. There's that old, Plato, the unexamined life is not worth living. Um, if you're not, if you don't take the time to think, there's no time to correct yourself and say, is this where I should be going, and is this where I want to be going? And yeah, I agree, it is a luxury. Trust me, after having kids and all sorts of you know and then my work life, just finding the time to sit back and breathe is a luxury, and I wish I had appreciated it more when I was younger.
Yeah, yes. So we and this podcast, this will go out to 8 billion people and seven will watch, but that's fine. So who knows where the seven are at? So I don't want to get into to too much personal, but your kids are roughly the same age as mine, and I think, man, what did I do? I don't comprehend life before kids. It's something like I said. I have a rolling memory. For each year that goes on, three drop off. It happens that way, and so an extreme luxury to be able to take time. I think most of it ends up being a sacrifice or a trade. Everybody in the house has gone to sleep, and I'm quite literally sitting in the chair watching some professor or expert on faith with the cat sitting on my neck, and I'm just for hours just, and then you give up sleep and then you're grumped the next day. But it's still a sacrifice. But yeah, having those worldviews change. I think becoming a father, and again, I'm not blowing smoke, but you're my guest on here. I have seen you in public with your kids, and and your wife's fantastic, but I always find there's something. Society now, for some reason, it dislikes fathers. It's just, you know, yeah, everybody's equal. Everybody can do it the same, and whatever. I love seeing a good father relationship with kids, and I've never seen you not have that with your kids. So, um, I tend to think that being a father and enjoying that role, embracing that role, like yourself, I try to surround myself with other men who do that because I think it's encouraging. Um, Having that, your worldview cannot stay the same
No.
if you have kids and you enjoy them and you want to see them. um I- you know it turns into, oh, do you want a boy or a girl? Well, I just want someone healthy. And now it's you're chasing down milestones, just excited to see what they come up with next. And when they come up with something, it's valid, and I want to see how I can integrate that into my life. So that's my cheers to you for being a great dad.
Well, thank you. And I want to give credit to my own father. I mean, I had a good model to follow with him. I'll never forget. I went to, Catholic school in another town through eighth grade, so he would drive me to school every morning, and he'd answer my questions like, what's the stock market? What's the difference between Democrats and Republicans? What's this, that, or the other? How does this work? And he would always answer it. And, he seemed like the smartest guy in the world. And, I want to provide the same thing for, my kids, to teach them about the world that I brought them into or helped bring them into. And, what, because if you don't, someone will. Um,
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And there's some folks who just by the their happenstance, their circumstance, they're putting their kids in daycare, they're doing other things, and on all of that's fine. And we put Liam was in daycare for a little bit, like once or twice a week for a couple hours, just to socialize him, because I thought this at the time. My wife was working for the attorney general, and so she was just working insane hours. And I thought, this dude's going to grow up to be a nerdy Republican with Star Trek stuff on the wall behind him. I should at least explain. Now I completely support that, clearly, with the background. But I said, he should be socialized. And I also think that was a bit of a mistake because but yeah, having I don't know. Um I have so many different thoughts right now, and I want to ping on one real quick. Your dad's driving you to school. I love my car time with Liam. I absolutely love it. We sing, we dance, we tell stories, we converse about things. I I make it an intention to have a conversation when we're in the car. But car time is very special for me. You said for a long time, he was the smartest man, and I think as men develop, there's different relationships they have with their father as they go on. For the while, they're the smartest person they know, and then they are an adversary. We are meant to break out and flee, and at some point. You don't have to get into this if you don't want to. You could just wave me off and we'll talk about something else. But at some point, I know with myself, with the recent passing of my mother, uh, I'm going through this, and I'm in my 40s. He's going to be 70, and so we're mature in our own rights. But now I'm seeing a different humanizing aspect of him. At what point, in your life, did you go from maybe the hero worship to partner, friend, equal? Because you speak of him occasionally, and social media is what it is. But I often see that there's family gatherings and stuff, and so it seems to be a very good, solid relationship that you all still have. Um, at any point, did it turn into that's not hero worship anymore? It's something else.
Yeah, I legitimately became friends with him. I would say that probably happened, during college, when you're away,
Hmm.
and law school was even more because it was like, hey, it was an experience we both had. You know, how are things the same? How have they changed? You know, and that's the other thing about law school is you read these, cases from England in the 1700s, and oh, are they still teaching that? That
Yeah.
sort of thing. Um, we would have shows have cigars together now and then. Although he had to stop recently, and Ivana doesn't like it, so we haven't done that together for a long time. But
Yeah. We are about an hour into this, so I wanna wrap up here with the Bernard Pivot questionnaire.
okay,
Now, you're a smart guy, so you could probably read it to me in seven different languages. I don't know. What I always liked interview shows, but not, you know, of the late night folks. Craig Ferguson to me will always be the absolute best. There was something about his style, how he approached it, that I liked. But for the rest of them, talk shows didn't do much for me. What I liked about Inside the Actor Studio is there was sometimes where folks are talking about, like we did, your background, your experiences, what things were like. But I always liked the questionnaire at the end. Now he modified it a little bit. I've done kind of the same, just because I'm not some cigarette smoking 1970s guy. This is different for me. Um, but I liked that as I'm building this here, and each time I do an episode, I feel like it's just a different chapter in a book. I feel like it recenters back on. I'm just going to ask the same 10 questions, and it's amazing. Some folks, if I've asked it 10 times, I get the same answer, and then other times I get something different. So we are going to go with these 10. I'm assuming you know what the questionnaire is. And if you don't, even
vaguely,
better.
I
Oh,
remember seeing it a long time ago.
so
So I'm actually gonna. I did not prepare for this.
I appreciate that. That was one of the questions I had. I was like, oh, don't give me church answers, because you can really come up with it, and everybody's like, oh, Adam's the smartest ever. He came up with this lengthy. It's like, nah, I'm not going for that. Just off the cuff, 10 questions, somewhat rapid fire. What's your favorite word?
In English?
Any word.
Hmm.
Though, if you give it to me in a foreign language, you are
I'll
going to
have
have
to,
to describe it.
I'll have to translate it. Yeah, I. That's the caveat. Oh, now that's. I was afraid you'd. I know that's one of the questions, and I was afraid you'd ask it, and I. I don't know, and I would choose it not based on its sound at all, but on what the word means. Uh, and I would probably say the word is soul, Soul.
Okay.
Just because the books and books and books have been written about what it is and whether it is and what it means and how it relates to the physical body. Um, there's a lot there, so I'll go with that one.
Perfect. What is your least favorite word?
Oh, do I have to pick just one? Um, oh yes, yeah. I would say this might be controversial. Is democracy, because the way you hear it's talked about has nothing to do with with a system of government that involves voting. It always means, in fact, in some cases it means the exact opposite of that. It's one of those shibboleths that's lost all meaning.
Great episode of The West Wing, by the way. Shibboleth.
Hmm. You know
That
where that
was
word comes from?
That's from the Bible. That was the word that they would speak to proclaim faith, if I'm not mistaken.
No, it's the name of a river, and there was one, and one group of people pronounced it Shibboleth, and the other Sibboleth. And if you, I forget which one was the one that was the ally, but they'd ask them to say it, and if they said it wrong, they'd kill them.
Well, let's say it right. How about
Yeah.
that? The next one, again, this was from the 1960s, 1970s, I believe. The question is, and you know what, I'm going to ask the original question because you will understand that I don't necessarily mean it to be illicit. What is your favorite drug?
Uh, Alcohol,
Yeah,
and specifically wine.
wine.
It puts you in a good place.
If you were to be reincarnated, could be anything else. What would you be?
Like any other creature,
Yeah, and
or
any other creature, any other living being. You are phoenixed into something.
okay, a tree.
Fantastic. What noise or sound do you hate?
Oh, that it probably depends what mood you catch me in. But I'd have to go with, a running lawnmower on a nice summer day.
What noise or sound do you love?
Again, can I just pick? I have to just pick one.
Yep.
This is going to sound counterintuitive, but I love the sound of a running dishwasher, at the end of the day, at nighttime, right before bed. It's just an end of the day is done.
There's something complete.
Yeah.
Your checklist is done. You have eaten. You have cleaned up after yourself. You are prepared for the next day. Fantastic answer. What is your favorite curse word?
Ooh. Um. Ooh.
It's probably the one you thought of as you just chuckled.
That's changed. I used to never say this, but lately, um, and I don't say this out loud or when other people are around, but I just drop F bombs all the time when something happens. So I don't know if I'd say that's a favorite, but it's the one I've been using the
Yeah,
most as of lately.
yeah. Um, I've said this on several of my episodes here. I teach to the chagrin of not only Becca and probably his teachers. I tell them that there's no bad words. There's no such thing as bad word. I completely there's no bad. There are adult words and times to use them, but there are no bad words. And I'm a bit of a trucker when it comes to, and I do a couple radio shows up here, and I tell you that is the biggest struggle. Is to I have to get in a spot where it's like, okay, you're on the phone with your grandmother, go, because otherwise they'll just come out. Three more
Well,
questions.
well, just
Oh, go
on
ahead.
that real quick. So my wife is from Argentina, and it's it's a different kind of Spanish than what you learn in class up here. Very heavily influenced by Italian, and there's such
Two,
potty
two, two
mouths.
of the I was gonna say two of the calmer cultures
Yeah,
out there.
I mean, no, and there's such potty mouths, and there's a whole vocabulary of swearing that you won't find in any other country. So I've learned it, and there's a few. Some of them are hard to translate too. So I know when I hear one word, it's like, oh, I'm in trouble. That's
You know you haven't
whereas
started
there's
the
other swear
dishwasher.
words like
Yes.
everybody uses it. Like
Yeah. I next time I see her, I will ask for I'll ask for some examples.
well, yeah, the biggest one is like this pelotudo. It's like, you could use it in a friendly, que pelotudo, what, that's how stupid, but if you're like, "Que pelotudo, you're in trouble.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Would I like to attempt, um, I would say journalist,
Yeah.
like real journalist, not propagandist, like investigating and exposing things and writing about it, and not necessarily controversy, travel journalism, things like that.
What profession other than your own would you not like to attempt?
Um, Medical doctor. I deal with it. Again, this might sound controversial, but after becoming a lawyer, my opinion of doctors is almost done a 180. Especially a lot of what I used to do is in some cases defend medical malpractice cases, and or even in an injury case, you have the doctors testify. Again, just like I said about judges earlier, they're not all brilliant, and a lot of them certainly think a lot of themselves.
Yeah.
And plus, you're around sick people all day. It's not work that, and you're in a hospital. Not necessarily work that interested me.
No, no. Final question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You made it.
You made it. Adam Sedia, thank you so much for taking an hour plus out of your day today. Like
Thanks for having me.
like I said in the beginning, you've got many hats. So to find an hour to spend with me doing this when you could be doing a million other things, I really do appreciate it. And that's all we've got for today, folks. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.